I'm not crying, these are crocodile tears. The words left my daughter-in-law's lips like venom, slicing through the heavy silence of the church. Gasps echoed across the pews. Some hands flew to mouths. Others turned their heads to stare at her with wide eyes. My son's widow, the woman who had shared his home, his table, and his life, had just mocked me, mocked my grief, as we laid my boy to rest. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even look at her. I simply folded my hands in my lap, lowered my eyes, and let the insult hang in the air. A hush fell, and people shifted in their seats, waiting for me to respond. But I smiled, a thin, knowing smile, because I had been waiting for this moment. And when the lawyer stood up to read the will, that smile grew wider. My daughter-in-law's face drained of all color, her mouth opening slightly like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands trembled as she clutched her black clutch purse tighter, and her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. Everyone in that church saw it the moment the mask slipped. What she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this day long before the casket was lowered. And it all began months earlier. My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie. I am 74 years old, a widow, and until recently, the proud mother of 2 sons. Life has given me both laughter and sorrow. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people reveal their true hearts when they think no one is watching. My late husband, Richard, used to say, "Kindness costs nothing, but cruelty will make you pay a heavy price." I believed him then, and I believe him even more now. When my son Daniel married Claire 6 years ago, I tried to welcome her into the family with an open heart. She was beautiful, sharp, and ambitious. Daniel adored her, and all I wanted was for my boy to be happy. At first, Claire smiled sweetly at me, calling me Mom, and bringing me flowers on Mother's Day. But soon, the warmth began to fade. Her smiles became forced. Her visits grew shorter, and her words, always wrapped in sugar when Daniel was around, turned into daggers when no one else could hear. "You're too old to be living in that big house all alone," she once said, standing in my kitchen, her eyes scanning the cabinets like she was already measuring where her things might go. "Wouldn't it be easier if you just downsized?" I laughed it off at the time, thinking maybe she meant well. But deep down, something told me she was already counting what wasn't hers. Daniel, bless his heart, never saw it. He worked long hours at the hospital, saving lives as a surgeon, while Claire smiled for him at dinners and played the perfect wife in front of his friends. But I saw it, and I remembered. The turning point came last winter. It was the kind of night that chills you down to the bone, the snow falling so thick you could barely see the road. Daniel had called me earlier that day, promising to stop by after work with groceries. He always worried about me shoveling the driveway or carrying heavy bags. But Daniel never came. Instead, my phone rang close to midnight. It wasn't Daniel. It was the police. There had been an accident on the icy road. Daniel's car had skidded off the bridge. They said he didn't suffer, but my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces all the same. At the hospital, Claire cried dramatically in the waiting room, clutching her designer coat, her tears staining her mascara. But when she turned to me, her expression shifted, just for a split second, into something I'll never forget. Not grief, not pain, but calculation. And I knew then what kind of woman my son had married. The days after Daniel's death blurred together. Friends brought casseroles. Neighbors sent cards. My other son, Michael, flew in from Boston and stayed by my side. He held me when I cried, and he reminded me of Dad's words. Kindness and cruelty always reveal themselves in the end. But Claire? She was busy making phone calls, meeting with advisors, and dropping hints about future plans. She hardly spoke to me unless others were around. Then came the day of the funeral. The church was packed, filled with people whose lives Daniel had touched. The choir sang softly, and the scent of lilies filled the air. I sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief, my heart heavy with grief. Claire sat beside me, her eyes darting toward every person who entered, as though she were keeping track. When it came time for people to share words about Daniel, I stayed quiet. My grief was too deep to form sentences. And that's when she leaned over and whispered those cruel words. "I'm not crying. These are crocodile tears. She wanted people to hear. She wanted to humiliate me. But she had no idea what was coming. Because Dana may have been gone, but he had left behind something more powerful than she could have imagined. Something that would change everything. And as the lawyer stood up, rustling the papers in his hand, the air in the church grew thick with anticipation. Every eye turned forward. Every breath seemed to pause. And Claire, poor, foolish Claire, was about to learn that cruelty always comes with a price. The lawyer cleared his throat. And then, the lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice steady though the room buzzed with tension. This is the last will and testament of Dr. Daniel Carter. I heard the collective shuffle of feet on the church floor as people leaned forward. Even the sniffles from the grieving guests grew quieter. Every word he spoke was about to determine the future, my son's legacy, his home, his money, his dreams. I kept my eyes down, though my heart pounded against my ribs. I already knew what Daniel had written. I had sat with him only a month before the accident, sipping tea in my living room, as he confided in me. He had been thinking about updating his will. He'd told me he loved Claire, but had doubts about her loyalty. He didn't want his life's work squandered. He had asked me for advice, and together we'd crafted something that made sense to him. Claire didn't know that, and the moment the lawyer began to read, her face betrayed her. To my beloved wife Claire, the lawyer started. Claire straightened, her chin lifted, her painted lips curling into a confident smile. Her hand rested delicately on her purse like she was already the queen of the room. I leave the jewelry she personally selected during our marriage, along with the car she currently drives. The gasp that slipped out of her mouth wasn't masked in time. She blinked, leaned forward, and then let out a nervous laugh, as if she thought he was joking. But the lawyer kept reading. Her knuckles whitened around the edge of the pew. I further direct that all proceeds from my life insurance, my savings accounts, and my estate, including the family home, shall be placed into a trust under the care of my mother, Margaret Carter, until such time as it is determined appropriate to distribute to my next of kin. The air was sucked out of the room. Even I felt the sting of the shock ripple through the guests. People turned their heads slowly, eyes bouncing from me to Claire. Some whispered. Others just stared. Claire froze. Her mouth hung open. Her cheeks drained of color until she looked like marble. For a moment, I thought she might faint. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a shaky whisper. That can't be right. The lawyer ignored her protest. His voice rang firm and clear, slicing the silence like a blade. Daniel had left his entire estate, his savings, his investments, the house she lived in, under my care. And in that instant, Claire's confident mask shattered into dust. The less extreme moments came after the will was read, though the church was still thick with tension. Some people murmured about Daniel's generosity, others about his foresight. My son Michael leaned close and squeezed my hand, whispering, "Mom." Daniel knew. He knew. But Claire? She sat still as a statue, her jaw locked, her eyes staring straight ahead like she had been struck by lightning. For once, she had no clever remark, no cutting words. The silence around her was louder than anything she had ever said. After the lawyer finished, the pastor stood, his voice trembling as he offered the final prayer. The choir sang again, soft and mournful. The coffin was carried out, and people filed toward the graveyard for the burial. I walked slowly, my body tired from both grief and the weight of what had just unfolded. Yet inside me, there was a quiet strength. I thought of Richard's words again, "Cruelty makes you pay a heavy price." At the graveside, I stood beside Michael. We watched as Daniel's coffin was lowered into the earth. I whispered a goodbye only he and God could hear. My tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. Real tears, not crocodile tears. And as the dirt fell softly onto the casket, I felt both heartbreak and resolve. Daniel was gone, but his final act had protected me. Still, I knew Claire would not let this go quietly. The storm came sooner than I expected. As the mourners gathered in the church hall afterward for the reception, Claire found me. She didn't bother hiding her anger this time. Her face was flushed red, her eyes blazing, her voice low but sharp as glass. "You knew about this, didn't you?" she hissed, stepping close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. You put him up to it. You poisoned him against me. I looked at her, my expression calm. Daniel made his own decisions. You think you've won, she spat, her teeth gritted. This isn't over. That house, that money, it should be mine. Everyone knows it. I held her gaze, steady as stone. No, Claire. Everyone knows something else now. Everyone saw your face today, and they will remember. Her lips trembled with rage, and for the first time, I saw fear behind her anger. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing everything she had been planning for. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. I'll find a way to take it back. You'll see. Then she turned sharply on her heel, her heels clicking across the hall floor as she stalked away. People noticed. They always notice. That night, after all the guests had gone and Michael had fallen asleep in the guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but my mind was not. I thought of Daniel's laughter, of how he used to bring flowers for no reason, of how he always made sure I had everything I needed. My heart ached knowing I'd never hear his voice again. And then my thoughts drifted to Claire's threat. She wasn't bluffing. I knew her well enough by now. She would not rest until she tried to tear me down. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't just some old woman to be pushed aside. I had lived through more storms than she could imagine. And this storm, hers, would be the last she ever tried to unleash. Because I was already prepared. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Michael's voice in the living room. He was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. When he hung up, he turned to me, his face serious. That was the lawyer, he said. Claire's already trying to contest the will. I nodded slowly, my lips pressing into a thin line. I wasn't surprised. Michael rubbed his temples. She's not going to stop, Mom. She's going to fight. Yes, I said softly. And so will I. Just as the words left my mouth, the phone rang again. Michael answered and his face paled. It's Claire, he whispered, handing me the phone. I lifted it to my ear, and her voice slithered through the line, dripping with venom. This isn't over, Margaret. You'll regret crossing me. The phone call still echoed in my mind long after I set the receiver down. Claire's voice had been cold, sharper than broken glass. This isn't over, Margaret. You'll regret crossing me. I sat quietly in my armchair, the morning light slipping through the curtains, painting thin gold lines across the living room carpet. Outside, the world looked peaceful. Birds chirped in the trees. A mailman whistled as he walked by. But inside, I could feel a storm gathering. Michael paced back and forth, his fists clenched. She's unhinged, Mom. You can't take her lightly. I've seen her type before, calm in public, ruthless in private. I looked at my son, the one who had always been the cautious planner, and I managed a tired smile. I know, Michael, but I also know something else. People who build their lives on lies and greed always trip over their own steps. We just have to be ready when it happens. Michael shook his head. You have too much faith in people. No, I said softly. I just have enough faith in truth. For the rest of that week, life moved in slow waves. Neighbors dropped by with food, their kindness reminding me that not all hearts are cold. My old friend Evelyn came over one afternoon, bringing fresh-baked cookies and stories about our youth, making me laugh for the first time since Daniel's passing. But under the warmth of those small kindnesses, a shadow lingered. Claire had disappeared from sight, and that silence made me uneasy. It was the kind of quiet before lightning strikes. 3 days later, I saw her for the first time since the funeral. I had gone to the grocery store with Michael. As we pushed the cart down the cereal aisle, I heard the clicking of heels on the floor behind me. The sound made my stomach tighten before I even turned. There she was, Claire. Her face was painted perfectly as always, her lips crimson, her eyes sharp as knives. She wore black again, as though the funeral were still going on, but there was no grief in her expression, only calculation. Margaret, she said smoothly, as if greeting an old friend. How lovely to see you out and about. Michael stiffened beside me. What do you want, Claire? She ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. I'm just concerned about your health. That's all. You're under a lot of stress. I wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to you while you're holding Daniel's estate in your hands. Her words were sugar-coated, but her tone was poison. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly, but I'll be fine. She leaned closer, her perfume overpowering, her voice dropping low. You won't be. Not for long. Then she smiled, straightened her coat, and walked away as if she'd said nothing at all. Michael exhaled sharply, anger flashing in his eyes. She's threatening you, Mom. I know, I whispered. But I didn't let my fear show. Because fear was exactly what Claire wanted. The quieter days that followed lulled everyone else into thinking things might settle, but I wasn't fooled. Claire wasn't the type to walk away quietly. I saw her shadow everywhere, her car parked 2 streets over, her name whispered in town when people thought I couldn't hear. And then the phone calls started. At first, they were just hang-ups. The phone would ring in the middle of the night, waking me from shallow sleep, only for silence to greet me on the other end. But soon, the silence turned into whispers. A woman's voice, distorted, low. You'll lose everything. You don't belong in that house. Accidents happen. Michael insisted on calling the police, but what could we prove? No one saw her, no one recorded her voice. And Claire was too clever to leave evidence behind. So I endured it, reminding myself that I had survived worse storms. Still, the stress gnawed at me. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Richard's words running through my mind like a mantra. Cruelty makes you pay a heavy price. But one night I wondered, what if that price wasn't just hers to pay? What if she dragged me down with her before the truth came out? A week after the funeral, the first real strike came. It was a Friday evening. Michael had gone to Boston for a work meeting, promising to be back by Sunday. I was alone in the house, sitting in the living room with a cup of chamomile tea, when I heard it, glass shattering in the kitchen. My heart jumped. I set the cup down and grabbed the cane by my chair, moving as quickly as my legs would take me. The kitchen window had been smashed. Shards of glass glittered on the tile floor like deadly stars. The cold night air rushed in through the jagged opening. And there, on the countertop, sat an envelope. I froze. Someone had broken the window not to steal, but to deliver. With trembling hands, I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, the words printed in bold, black letters. Get out of the house or you'll join Daniel. My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. The cane clattered to the floor. Claire had made her move, and this time it wasn't just whispers in the dark. The letters shook in my hands, the bold words blurring as my vision swam with tears I refused to let fall. Get out of the house or you'll join Daniel. For a moment, I stood frozen in the cold air rushing through the shattered kitchen window. The night seemed to press closer, shadows stretching long across the floor. My breathing came shallow, ragged. Then the fear turned into something else. Anger. I picked up the cane, steadied myself, and forced my legs to move. I called the police, my voice steady though my heart thundered in my chest. An officer arrived 20 minutes later, his flashlight sweeping over the broken glass, the letter sealed carefully in a plastic bag. He frowned. Looks like someone wanted to scare you, ma'am. I fixed him with a hard stare. This wasn't just a scare. It's a warning, and I know exactly who sent it. But when I said Claire's name, the officer shifted uncomfortably. Without proof, there's not much we can do besides file a report. Maybe you should stay with a family member for a while. I almost laughed. Leave my home? Abandon the place Richard built with his own hands, the place where Daniel grew up? That would be giving Claire exactly what she wanted. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. The officer nodded slowly, as though he pitied me. He promised to have patrol cars keep an eye on the neighborhood, then left. The house fell silent again, broken glass still crunching under my slippers. And I realized something then. Claire was finished with subtlety. She was ready to destroy me, and if I wasn't careful, she might succeed. The next day, Michael returned. His face turned pale when he saw the boarded-up kitchen window and the letter the police had left in its evidence bag. She's crossing the line, Mom, he said, his voice shaking with anger. This isn't just harassment. She's dangerous. I know, I replied quietly. He wanted me to stay with him in Boston. He begged me, but I refused. Running would only feed Claire's power. This was my home, Richard's home, Daniel's home. and I would not let her steal it from me. Instead, I suggested something else. We need to be smarter, I said. If she thinks I'm a weak old woman, let her keep thinking that. We'll be ready. Michael frowned. Ready for what? For when she makes her next move, I said. Because she would. People like Claire didn't stop after one threat. They escalated, and I had to be prepared when she did. The calm didn't last long. 2 nights later, I awoke to the sharp, acrid smell of smoke. My eyes snapped open. My chest tightened. I pushed myself out of bed, my cane tapping urgently against the wooden floor as I moved down the hallway. The smell grew stronger as I reached the kitchen. My heart froze. A dish towel, soaked in something oily, lay smoldering in the corner near the stove. Small flames licked its edges, smoke curling upward like black fingers. Panic surged, but I forced myself to act. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink and blasted the flames until they hissed out, leaving behind a scorched mess and a cloud of smoke that burned my throat. Michael rushed in, coughing, his eyes wide with terror. Mom, what happened? I pointed to the towel. Someone tried to burn us alive. He stared at the window above the sink, unlocked. I swear I locked this last night, he muttered, his voice trembling. And that's when I saw it. A faint footprint on the kitchen tile. A woman's shoe. Small. Expensive. Claire. By morning, the house still smelled faintly of smoke. My nerves felt raw, every creak of the floorboard setting me on edge. Michael sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face pale with exhaustion. This is attempted murder, he said flatly. We have to go to the police again. We will, I told him. But even as I spoke, I knew the police might not help. Without cameras or witnesses, it would be my word against hers. And Claire had always been clever enough to slip through cracks. But what she didn't know was that I had already started preparing for this. While Michael argued with the police over the phone, I quietly made a call of my own. To an old friend of Richard's, a man who had once run a small security company. By that evening, discreet cameras were hidden in corners of the house, small enough that no intruder would notice. The next time Claire tried something, she wouldn't just leave behind footprints. She'd leave behind proof. That night, Michael finally convinced me to get some rest. Exhausted, I sank into bed, clutching Richard's old rosary in my hand. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of fire and smoke. But just before dawn, I woke again. Not from a smell this time. From a sound. A creak. Soft but deliberate. Someone was inside the house. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed, gripping my cane tightly. The hallway stretched before me, the shadows long and dark. Another creak. Closer this time. I forced myself forward, step by slow step, until I reached the staircase. My heart thundered so loudly I feared it would give me away. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, I saw it, just a flash. A figure moving in the dark. A woman's silhouette. And in her hand, the lighter. The figure at the bottom of the stairs froze when I whispered, Claire. For a split second, the only sound was the faint click of the lighter in her hand. Then her head tilted upward, and even in the shadows, I saw the flash of her smile. A cruel, twisted smile. Well, she said softly, her voice floating up the stairs, look who's still awake. My grip on the cane tightened. Get out of my house. She took a step forward, the flame from the lighter flickering to life. The small light illuminated her face, cold, sharp, unhinged. Or what? She whispered. You'll call the police again? They can't protect you. No one can. Before I could respond, Michael's voice thundered from behind me. Claire. He came rushing down the hallway, his footsteps pounding, his face flushed with fury. She stumbled back a step, startled, but kept the lighter held high. Stay where you are, she snapped. Michael ignored her. He bounded down the stairs, his fists clenched. Put it down before you do something you can't undo. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Undo. Your mother undid my life the moment she stole Daniel's estate from me. She thinks she's clever, but she won't live long enough to enjoy it. I raised my voice, sharp and steady. Daniel made his choice, Claire. And now everyone sees you for what you really are. Her face twisted with rage. She flicked the lighter higher, holding it toward the curtain near the front window. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd do it, set the house ablaze with us still inside. But Michael lunged, knocking the lighter from her hand. It clattered across the wooden floor, the flame snuffing out as it spun. Claire shrieked, clawing at him, her nails raking across his cheek. Michael pinned her arms, his teeth gritted, struggling to hold her still. "Call the cops, Mom," he shouted. My hand shook as I dialed. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights filled the street. Officers stormed in, pulling Claire away as she screamed, "This isn't over. Do you hear me? It's not over." Her voice echoed down the block as they shoved her into the back of the police car. Neighbors had gathered outside in their robes and slippers, whispering, pointing. For once, Claire wasn't the polished woman she pretended to be. She was exposed, wild-eyed, desperate. And everyone saw it. The hours that followed blurred together. The police took our statements, bagged the lighter as evidence, and promised to press charges. Michael's cheek bled where her nails had cut him, but he brushed it off. "I've had worse," he muttered, though his hands trembled. When the officers finally left, the house felt eerily quiet. I sat in the living room, the boarded-up kitchen window reminding me of how far this nightmare had already gone. Michael sank onto the couch beside me. "She's going to prison this time, Mom. She can't talk her way out of this." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the law would protect us, that justice would finally corner her. But deep down, I knew Claire too well. She was cunning, manipulative, and relentless. And sure enough, 2 days later, the storm came again. We were sitting at the dining table, finishing lunch, when Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then answered. "Yes, what? That's impossible." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" He hung up slowly, his face pale. That was the lawyer. Claire made bail. "She's out." I felt the blood drain from my own face. "Out? Already?" Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "She's out. And Mom, she's coming after us harder than ever." At that moment, the phone rang again. This time, it was the landline. I picked it up, my heart pounding. A familiar voice hissed through the line. "You should have let the fire take you, Margaret. Next time, you won't be so lucky." And then the line went dead. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered against the hardwood floor. Michael snatched it up, pressing the receiver to his ear, but the line was already dead. He slammed it down, his face stormy. "That's it," he growled. "She's crossed every line. We need protection, Mom, real protection." I sat back in my chair, my breath shallow. Claire's voice still slithered in my mind. "You should have let the fire take you." She meant it, every word. But Michael was right. Hoping she'd stop was no longer an option. She wouldn't stop until she got what she thought she deserved, or until I was gone. The next morning, Michael arranged for a security detail. A retired police officer named Frank came by, a man with a broad chest and eyes that had seen too much but gave nothing away. He walked through the house, inspecting doors, windows, and every weak spot he could find. "You've got an enemy who's persistent," he said, his voice steady. "But persistence leaves patterns. We'll catch her if she comes again." His confidence calmed me, though only slightly. At night, I still woke at every creak of the house. The shadows seemed longer, darker. I prayed for peace, but my heart stayed heavy. The days that followed were oddly calm. Too calm. Claire was silent. No calls, no notes, no sudden appearances in grocery aisles. The police had warned her, perhaps. Maybe the taste of handcuffs had cooled her temper. But deep down, I knew better. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was strategy. One evening, Frank stopped by with an update. "I've noticed a car parked a few streets down the past couple nights," he said. "Same car, tinted windows, doesn't belong to any of the neighbors." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Claire." Frank nodded. "Could be her or someone she hired. Either way, it's surveillance. She's watching." The thought chilled me. I pictured her sitting in that car, her eyes fixed on my house, plotting her next move. The quiet felt like the inhale before the scream. Then the scream came. It was a Sunday morning. The church bells had just finished ringing, and I was in the garden trimming roses. The sun was warm on my face, the birds chirped, and for a brief moment, I felt almost at peace. Until Michael's shout shattered it. "Mom, come quick." I dropped the shears and hurried toward the driveway, my cane tapping against the stone path. Michael stood frozen beside my car, his face pale. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach turned to ice. The car's tires had been slashed. The windshield was smeared with red paint, thick, dripping like blood, and scrawled across the hood in jagged letters, "Next time IT won't be the car." My knees buckled. Michael caught me before I fell, his arms wrapping tightly around me. "Mom," he whispered fiercely, "she's escalating. She's telling us exactly what she's planning." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear not just in my own eyes, but in my son's. The words smeared across the hood haunted me all night. "Next time it won't be the car." I sat in my armchair, the lamp casting a warm circle of light while shadows stretched long across the walls. Michael paced the living room like a caged animal. Frank, the retired officer, leaned against the doorway with his arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the windows every few minutes. "She's not bluffing anymore," Frank said grimly. "She's telling you straight. She's coming for you." Michael stopped pacing, his fists clenched. "So what do we do?" "Wait until she breaks in again. Until he cut himself off, his voice cracking. "Until she hurts Mom." I placed a hand over his. "Daniel once told me that people who live on lies and greed eventually choke on them. Claire is building her own trap. We just have to hold strong." Frank shook his head. "Holding strong won't be enough if she decides tonight's the night." The uneasy calm lasted only 2 days. On the third night, I woke to a strange sound, a faint scraping against the back door. My body stiffened. My heart hammered in my chest. Slowly, I sat up, straining to listen. There it was again, a scraping followed by the soft click of metal against metal. Someone was trying to pick the lock. I reached for my cane and crept toward the hallway. Michael emerged from his room at the same time, his eyes wide, a baseball bat gripped in his hands. Frank was already moving, his gun drawn, his face like stone. "Stay behind me," he whispered. We moved silently toward the kitchen. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. And then, with a soft snap, the lock gave way. The back door swung open. A figure slipped inside, cloaked in black. But it wasn't the clothes that gave her away. It was the hair. Long, blonde, pulled into a tight ponytail. Claire. Frank raised his weapon. "Freeze." But instead of stopping, she lunged forward, straight toward me. Her hands reached out, clawing, her face twisted with pure rage. "You stole everything from me," she shrieked. Michael swung the bat, the sound of wood cracking against her arm echoing through the kitchen. She screamed, stumbling back, but her eyes still burned like fire. Frank shoved her to the ground, pinning her with one knee. "Don't move," he barked. For a moment, I thought it was over. That finally we had stopped her. But then I saw it, the glint of metal in her hand. A knife. She slashed wildly, the blade catching Frank's arm. He cried out, the gun clattering to the floor. Claire scrambled to her feet, her eyes locking on me again. And this time, she came straight at me, the knife raised high. The knife flashed in the dim kitchen light as Claire lunged at me. I stumbled backward, my cane slipping from my hand. My breath caught in my throat. Michael moved faster than I'd ever seen him, shoving me aside, just as the blade sliced through the air where I had been standing. The sound of it cutting the air was sharp, terrifying. Claire's face was a mask of madness. Her teeth were clenched, eyes wide, veins standing out along her neck. "You should have died with him," she screamed, spittle flying. Michael wrestled her arm, both of them straining, the knife inches away from his chest. Their bodies crashed into the counter, rattling the dishes. Frank, bleeding from his arm, tried to push himself up, but the wound slowed him. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy ceramic vase Daniel had given me years ago. My hand shook, but I raised it high. "Enough, Claire," I shouted, and with every ounce of strength left in my body, I swung. The vase shattered against her shoulder. She screamed, the knife tumbling from her hand. Michael kicked it across the floor, sending it spinning under the table. For a second, silence, just ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then Claire lunged again, not for me this time, but for the gun Frank had dropped. No, Michael roared, diving after her. They hit the floor hard, grappling. The gun skidded further, spinning to rest near the fridge. My eyes darted to it. I didn't think. I just moved, crawling on hands and knees, my palms burning against the tile. I reached the weapon first. My fingers closed around the cold metal grip. I had never held a gun before. It felt impossibly heavy, wrong in my frail hands. But when I turned, Claire froze. Her wild eyes flicked between me and the barrel pointed at her chest. The madness faltered, just for a heartbeat. She smirked. You won't shoot me. You don't have it in you. And maybe she was right. My finger trembled on the trigger. My chest heaved. I wasn't a killer. But I wasn't helpless either. Get out. My voice cracked like thunder in the small kitchen. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. But hesitation wasn't surrender. In a blink, she twisted free of Michael's grip, darted for the back door, and vanished into the night. The kitchen was left in ruins, blood on the floor, shattered ceramic, overturned chairs. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the gun. Michael took it from me gently, setting it on the counter. Frank clutched his wounded arm, grimacing. She won't stop. Not until she's behind bars, or worse. Michael looked at me, his face pale. Mom, she almost killed you tonight. I sank into a chair, exhaustion pressing down on me. Claire hadn't just tried to scare us anymore. She had crossed the line. She had come into my home with a weapon, ready to end me. And as much as I hated it, Frank was right. She wouldn't stop. The question was, how far was I willing to go to end this? The house was eerily quiet the next morning, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Michael sat at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. Frank had gone to the hospital for stitches and promised he'd return. I moved slowly, my body sore from the struggle, but it wasn't my bones that hurt most. It was the weight pressing on my heart. Claire had crossed into madness, and mad people didn't play by rules. The police came that afternoon. They photographed the broken vase, the blood, the knife under the table. One officer, a young woman with kind eyes, asked me gently, "Do you want to press charges, ma'am?" I wanted to scream yes, but fear knotted my throat. If Claire was out on bail the next day, she'd come back angrier, stronger. Instead, I whispered, "I just want to be safe." The officer nodded, her eyes softening. "We'll do everything we can." But I saw the doubt there too. Paperwork and promises couldn't stop someone like Claire. For a few days, nothing happened. The house felt like a bunker. Locks double-checked, blinds drawn, Frank stationed at the window whenever he was over. But Claire's absence was louder than her presence. "She's plotting," Michael muttered one evening, pacing the floor, waiting for the perfect moment. I feared he was right. And then one morning, I found out just how far she was willing to go. It started with the phone. The landline rang, sharp and jarring. I picked it up, my voice shaking. "Hello." Silence. Then a whisper. Low, venomous. "Tick, tock, Margaret. Time's running out." The line went dead. My heart pounded as I set the phone down. I rushed to tell Michael, but before I could, the doorbell rang. We both froze. "Stay back," Michael said, grabbing the bat he'd kept near the couch. He peeked through the peephole, then groaned. "It's a delivery truck." Confused, I followed him as he opened the door. Two men stood there in uniforms, hauling a large cardboard box on a dolly. "Delivery for Margaret Lewis," one said. "I didn't order anything," I replied, my stomach sinking. The men shrugged. "Signature required, ma'am." Something about it felt wrong. The handwriting on the label. The faint, sour smell from the box. Michael signed. Suspicion etched across his face, and they wheeled it into the foyer. The moment they left, he grabbed a knife and slit the tape. The flaps opened, and inside was not a package. It was a cage filled with dead, bloodied pigeons. On top, a note scrawled in thick black marker. "Next time, IT will be you in the box." I screamed, stumbling back, my hands trembling. Michael cursed, slamming the box shut, his face pale with fury. She wasn't just threatening anymore. She was promising. And I knew then, Claire wasn't circling the edges of madness anymore. She had stepped fully into it. The smell from that box lingered long after Michael dragged it out of the house and into the yard. Dead feathers clung to the floor like some horrible omen. Even after scrubbing, after dousing the air with lavender spray, I swore I could still smell the rot. Claire wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. She wanted me to feel hunted. She wanted me to know she could reach inside my home, inside my life, whenever she chose. That night, sleep was impossible. Michael and I sat in the living room with Frank, the silence heavy except for the occasional creak of the house settling. Michael's jaw was tight as he paced, his hands flexing like he wanted to strangle something. "She's not stopping," he muttered. "She's testing us, seeing how far she can go." Frank leaned forward, his stitched arm bandaged thickly. "She's escalating faster than I thought. Sending dead animals, that's ritualistic. Personal. She's not bluffing, son. She's telling you she's willing to destroy everything in her way." My fingers twisted together in my lap. But why? What does she gain from terrorizing us like this? Daniel's estate is settled. She can't change the will. Frank's eyes met mine. It's not about money anymore. It's about power, control, revenge. People like her, once they feel cheated, they need blood, not cash. The room fell silent. And I realized then, this wasn't just about me. If she couldn't hurt me directly, she'd find another way. The next morning, Michael decided to go into town for errands. I begged him not to, but he insisted. "She's after you, Mom," he said, kissing the top of my head. "I'll be fine. I'll grab groceries, gas, and be back in an hour." Still, my chest tightened as I watched his car roll down the street. The unease gnawed at me until I could barely breathe. Hours passed, longer than an errand should have taken. I tried his phone. Straight to voicemail. My stomach dropped. Frank noticed my panic. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his keys. "I'll check the roads, see if he's broken down." But before he could leave, the house phone rang. I snatched it up. "Michael." A pause. Then a voice I hated. "Claire, you really should have kept your little boy close, Margaret." Her laughter slithered through the line. "Because now I have him." The room spun. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. "Where is he? What have you done?" "You'll see soon enough," she whispered. Tick-tock. The line went dead. When Frank returned, my face must have told him everything. He cursed under his breath and slammed a fist into the wall. "She's escalated to kidnapping," he said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is war." We called the police, but their questions blurred together in my mind. Descriptions, timelines when I'd last seen him. None of it mattered. Michael was gone. Claire had him. And I was powerless. Hours dragged like days. Then, just as dusk fell, a black car rolled to a stop at the edge of my driveway. My heart nearly leapt into my throat. Frank gripped his gun, ready. The back door opened. Michael stumbled out. His hands were tied, his face bruised, his clothes torn. He collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for air. Frank rushed forward, cutting his bindings, checking him over. I knelt beside my son, my tears dripping onto his bloodied shirt. "Mom," his voice was hoarse, broken. She wanted me to tell you." His eyes darted toward the car. But before he could finish, the tires screeched and the vehicle sped off into the night. Michael clutched my arm, his body trembling. "She said this is just the beginning." I froze. My son, my protector, wasn't untouchable anymore. Claire had proven she could take him whenever she wanted. And worse, she had let him go. Not out of mercy, but as a message. This wasn't over. Not even close. And as I held Michael in my arms, feeling his heartbeat against mine, I knew the war Claire wanted was only just beginning. Michael lay on the couch, his head bandaged, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had been home for less than 12 hours, but I could already see the change in him. My strong, steady son, the one who had always been my rock, looked shaken to his core. "She blindfolded me," he whispered, his voice raw. "Drove me around for hours. I couldn't tell where we were. She kept laughing. saying I'd never see daylight again if you didn't break. The words made my stomach twist. Break. That's what she wanted, to see me crumble, to see me powerless. Frank sat across from us, jaw clenched. She's escalating into psychological warfare. She didn't kill him because she wants you alive, Margaret. She wants you terrified. Michael grabbed my hand, his grip weak, but desperate. Mom, she's going to come again. She won't stop. I stroked his hair, fighting the tears threatening to spill. For so long, I had prayed Claire would simply burn herself out. But now I realized Frank was right from the very beginning. This wasn't about the estate anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about destruction. And if I didn't stop her, she'd destroy my son, too. The following days were suffocating. Police patrol cars rolled past the house every hour, but Claire seemed to vanish into the shadows. No cars parked on corners, no strange calls, no boxes on the porch. She's waiting, Frank muttered one evening, peering through the blinds. She's planning something big. I felt it too, like pressure in the air before a thunderstorm. And then the storm broke. It was midnight when the fire alarm shrieked. I bolted upright, my chest hammering. Smoke curled through the hallway, thick and acrid. Fire! Michael shouted, staggering from his room. Frank was already moving, pulling us both toward the stairs. But when we reached the foyer, the sight froze me in place. Flames licked up from the front door, devouring the wood. The windows crackled with heat. The fire wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Back door! Frank yelled, shoving us toward the kitchen. But when he yanked the handle, it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed. I choked on smoke, my eyes burning. We're trapped. Michael grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and cold night air rushed in. Frank shoved me through first, then Michael. The heat singed the back of my neck as I stumbled into the yard. We turned back just in time to see words written in gasoline across the lawn, igniting bright as the flames behind us. Burn with your memories. Michael's arm wrapped around me as the fire department's sirens wailed in the distance. My home, Daniel's home, was consumed before my eyes. The place where we'd raised our son, where we'd laughed and grieved, where every photo hung on the wall, it all turned to ash. Claire hadn't just attacked us. She destroyed the very heart of who we were. Hours later, wrapped in a scratchy blanket from the fire truck, I stared at the smoking ruins. Michael sat beside me, his arm in a sling from where he'd cut it climbing out. Frank spoke with police, his face grim. She won't stop, Frank said when he returned. Not until you're broken, Margaret. Or until she's in the ground. The weight of his words settled on me. I had spent months enduring, praying, hoping kindness and patience would be enough. But tonight, watching my home burn, I realized something. Claire didn't want peace. She wanted war. And if war was what she wanted, then war was what she would get. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I didn't feel like prey anymore. I felt like a woman with nothing left to lose. And that made me dangerous. The night after the fire, I sat in a borrowed chair at Michael's house, staring at the ashes smeared across my hands. My home, my sanctuary was gone. Daniel's books, our wedding photographs, the quilt my grandmother stitched by hand, all of it reduced to smoke. But what hurt most wasn't the loss of things. It was the look in my son's eyes. Fear. Helplessness. Claire had taken everything, and still she prowled for more. And that's when I understood. I couldn't keep reacting to her chaos. I couldn't keep waiting for the next knock, the next scream, the next shadow moving in the night. If Claire wanted a war, then I would choose the battlefield. The plan began quietly. I called Frank first. No more defense, I told him. It's time to end this. He hesitated. Margaret, are you sure? Once we start down this road. I'm already on it, I said. She burned Daniel's memory. She bruised my son. She thinks I'm weak because I'm old. But she's wrong. Frank's silence stretched before he finally answered. Then let's make her think she's won. Just long enough to catch her. The trap was simple, but it relied on one thing, Claire's arrogance. We leaked word, through a friend of a friend, that the insurance company had fast-tracked a payout for the burned house. A sizable sum temporarily deposited into my personal account until estate matters were sorted. I made sure the rumor found its way back to her. With Claire, greed was the hook. Rage was just the bait. Then we waited. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, the phone rang. Her voice slithered through the receiver. "Still alive, Margaret? You're harder to kill than I thought. But don't worry, I'll finish the job. And this time, I'll take the money too." I forced my voice to stay calm. "Come then, Claire. If you think you're strong enough." She laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, I will." Click. The line went dead. We staged the house perfectly. Frank set up hidden cameras in every corner of Michael's home. Police officers waited 2 streets over. And in the living room, I sat alone in a rocking chair, the glow of a lamp painting me in soft light. A bank envelope sat on the coffee table, fat with decoy bills. Michael wanted to stay beside me, but I shook my head. "She'll come for me, not you. Stay with the officers. If she gets past me, then you come." His eyes burned with protest, but finally he kissed my forehead and left. And then it was just me, alone, waiting. The clock ticked past midnight. The air was still. Every creak of the floorboards made my pulse quicken. Then, a window shattered in the back room. My hands gripped the armrests. Footsteps crept closer. And then she emerged. Claire. Her blonde hair hung wild around her face, her eyes feral. She wore black gloves, and in her hand was another knife, longer, sharper. "Well, well," she hissed, stepping into the light. The old widow, sitting on her pile of cash. "Did you really think you could keep me from what I deserve?" I met her gaze without flinching. "What you deserve, Claire, is justice." She laughed, throwing her head back. "Justice? No, Margaret. You deserve suffering. And tonight I'm giving it to you." She lunged. But this time, I wasn't the frail widow shrinking back. I swung the cane Daniel had carved for me, striking her wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. She howled in rage, tackling me from the chair. We fell hard, my ribs aching, her hands clawing at my throat. Her breath reeked of smoke and madness. But before she could tighten her grip, the living room flooded with light. Police. Freeze. Officers swarmed through every doorway, weapons raised. Claire froze, her eyes darting wildly. "No, no, she's lying." "She set me up," she screamed, thrashing as cuffs clicked around her wrists. Michael burst in then, pulling me into his arms. My body shook, but my spirit felt steady for the first time in months. Claire shrieked as they dragged her away. "This isn't over, Margaret. Do you hear me? It's never over." But as the squad car doors slammed and the sirens wailed into the night, I knew deep down, at least for us, it was finally over. Weeks later, Michael and I stood on the charred remains of my old home. Insurance would rebuild, but I realized I didn't want to live in those ashes again. Instead, I chose to move forward, into a smaller home, closer to Michael. Somewhere brighter. Somewhere hers would never haunt again. The lawyer eventually settled everything. Daniel's will was honored, his wishes carried out. Claire, meanwhile, faced charges that would keep her behind bars for a long, long time. One afternoon, as Michael and I planted roses in my new garden, he looked at me and said, "You never gave up, Mom. You never let her break you." I smiled softly, my hands in the soil. "Because kindness isn't weakness, Michael. And love is stronger than fear." The roses bloomed that spring, bright and stubborn against the wind. And those scars lingered, I knew Daniel would be proud. Because in the end, I hadn't just survived Claire's war. I had won it.